Hi there, and welcome to Naturally Recovering Autism. I am your host, Karen Thomas, and I want to thank you so much for being here and being a proactive parent and getting the resources that you need to let your child live their most fulfilling and independent life possible. When my own son was diagnosed with autism, I was told to drug him and try behavioral therapies, and there was nothing else that we could do for him but manage his symptoms the rest of his life. But I didn't want to do that. Fortunately, my background in craniosacral therapy of now 30 years let me know that the brain can and does heal, but I didn't know that much about autism. What I did know is that I didn't want to just mask the symptoms with dangerous drugs. I wanted to find the causes and work with them naturally. And fast forward, it took me a decade and a lot of time and effort, but today my son is no longer diagnosable with autism after being told it could not happen. So I'm here to share with you valuable resources to save you the time and some of the expense that I had to spend to figure it out, and to help you let your child lead to their best results possible. Every child's level of recovery is different, but we know that children who couldn't sleep through the night are sleeping now through the night and happily. Their immune systems are now strong where they were once sick all the time. Children who were nonverbal and their parents were told they could never speak are now speaking. Children who were getting D's and F's in school are getting A's and B's. And those that were so anxious all the time and couldn't sit still and were uncomfortable in their own bodies are now calm and happy and relaxed. And they're leading fulfilling and independent lives with friends. This is what we want for our kids. So I'm here to share the resources with you so that you can get the best results for your child, the best possible. And you can start that right now with my free download of the top 7 foods to eliminate beginning today, of the top foods that are the most inflammatory and toxic that are contributing to those physical and behavioral symptoms of autism that your child is having. They're making his life uncomfortable. So you can get that right now at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/7 foods. And feel free to share that with anybody you know who would be interested. And I will also link to it in today's show notes. There's, of course, a lot more than diet, but this is something you could start doing today that will begin to reduce those symptoms. And I'm happy to share everything I can with you. So right now, let's dive into today's episode. Picky eating can be one of those things that every parent seems to deal with. I mean, you've got trying to get your child to eat healthy foods, yet their gut is usually damaged and ill, as we've talked about a lot. Things like candida overgrowth and inflammation and glyphosate from wheat and dairy products and various things like that cause more inflammation. Candida actually has little legs on their spores that will bore holes in the lining of the gut. So we get something called leaky gut. Then we've got to heal that up. There's just these multiple issues around intestinal and permeability, them being able to absorb the nutrition from their food, but we've got to heal it up. And during this process, we've got to figure out how to get some nutrition in there. There are a few things that I'm going to be adding to today's show notes that will be helpful for you, because I've got some links that I've found to be very helpful for a lot of parents, because things that are in liquid or powder form tend to work better to either hide in a food that your child will eat. Now, maybe at first you're still giving them fruit. Now, we want to minimize fruit eventually, right? Because it feeds the candida and the bad bacteria. In the beginning, fruit will flavor things and we'll have a little bit in there. You can add some of the super green powder that will help the body to get minerals and vitamins, and actually a lot of these nutrients, deep nutrients from an organic powder that actually tastes good. Our first thought might be with a green powder, like, hey, it's probably my child won't eat it, but it's surprisingly good. They put a tiny bit of stevia flavoring in this particular one, and there are a lot of bad ones out there, so I'm going to give you a link to one on the show notes. But it's very important to know that that there is a green powder that has all of these nutrients that you can put a little bit into their smoothie. Maybe they'll eat a smoothie that you can make with some blueberries, or something that they'll eat because it's sweeter. Mix it in there and they'll eat it. Another thing I want to talk about today is collagen. Now, collagen is you can get as basically like a protein powder. It's a collagen protein powder, and it's very important to know that it acts as like a shock absorber. It will reduce a lot of friction. It's good for joints, and a lot of people know about it for skin and hair, which is also why it makes it very popular, especially with people in the health and beauty arena. But what it's important to know for our kids, besides their beauty, is that there are at least about 28 different types of collagen protein, and they consist of what's called like a triple helix of chain of repeating amino acid sequences. Now, these are in fiber. There's glycine, which is really, really important in healing up the gut lining, and also, it is something that will give our children a big source of protein. Now, it does come from a beef source. So usually that's where we're getting it from. So you want to do only grass-fed. I'm going to link in the show notes to a very high quality one that will not have any contaminants. It's a company that I think is one of the best for making these types of things. And all of the beef was grass fed. Everything's very healthy. There's no fillers, no junk in it, because you got to beware, of course, if you've noticed at the grocery store, that so many of these things have bad fillers in them. And collagen will also then give your child a source of protein. Now, about 18 grams of protein in a little scoop of this. And you can choose if you want to just sprinkle even like a half of a teaspoon into their smoothie, so it's more nutrition. Because this concern about how will I get nutrition into my child while I am healing their gut up, and while I'm trying to make these dietary changes that they don't want to make, because we've talked about it in past episodes as well, that your child is literally addicted to the very foods that are the worst for them. You've got gluten and casein, which are the proteins in dairy and wheat, and they actually create opiates as we eat them. Yes, opiates, just like the opiate drug. Now, for a healthy body, it can help to flush those out more easily. For our children with autism, or somebody with an ill gut that's not working properly, those opiates build up. So you will notice that your child will almost be like an addict needing a fix. Like they're just wanting more than anything. They want bread or pasta or crackers or something that's got some gluten in it. And it's because of this addiction. So it is a very slow weaning process to move them off of these foods. You also don't want to give them processed carbohydrates. Just because it's gluten-free does not mean it's good for you. So you want to be able to slowly reduce, again, these foods, because processed carbohydrates have turned to sugar in the body. And of course, you're knowing not to eat sugar, right? Because it's very inflammatory, as is corn. Soy is very bad for you. I know they say it's good for us. It is not. It's a high allergen. It's a phytoestrogen, which means it messes with your hormones. In liquid form, like a soy liquid product, is much worse even than the powder form. So, because it turns to glutamate in the brain, which is an excitotoxin, which means that it actually excites brain cells to the point of death, like monosodium glutamate and aspartame, the unnatural and very synthetic sweetener. So, you really got to be careful and cautious of these things. And I do give this list, and I explain more about them in my free 7 foods guide that I mentioned in the introduction. So please get that at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/7 foods, because I want you to not only know the list of the foods to avoid, but also why. Because if we're educated, informed, the more knowledge we have about something, the more understanding we have of why we're doing it, which gives us more motivation. Again, it's a little bit of that pain point, right? A little motivation to make sure that we're starting to follow these guidelines. Now, again, I know that the transition with picky eaters is very delicate and can be a little stressful. So that's, again, why some of these things I will link to in the show notes will be very helpful for you in helping in that transition. And again, collagen protein, hemp protein. Now, I mentioned collagen protein because it has so many benefits. The amino acids, it helps heal the gut lining, like bone broth. You can make homemade bone broth, or there are bone broth powders. Just make sure that you don't get one with any fillers. But homemade bone broth, literally a tablespoon or two added into their smoothie, where they won't taste it, is fine to help adding, again, collagen, just like this powder I'm mentioning, and also getting some protein source in them. And animal fat actually is very healing to the gut lining. Now, if you're a vegetarian, there are things like hemp powder. Now, hemp actually has some protein to it, so that is one of the things that you can get. But it is harder to get a lot of your B vitamins and a lot of the certain nutrients that come from animal sources. But again, animal sources are very, very important. Again, high in protein, but you've got to make sure that you're also doing organic. Beef has got to be grass fed and grass finished. If it's fed a bunch of grain at the end, you're getting the grain that's been sprayed with pesticides usually, and often glyphosate, which is that harsh chemical I will link to in the show notes. I've done an entire episode with an MIT professor, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who is a world-renowned expert on it and how it destroys the gut lining. Again, you might be doing a lot of work with your child and thinking, why aren't they getting better? There are other underlying factors. We've talked about mold biotoxins and Lyme in the past too. Yes, other co-infections of autism, also underlying factors for injuring the gut lining. We've got to get on top of all of these things. It's not just one thing, but this is our first step. We've got to get some protein in them. We've got to get some of these amino acids and some vitamins and nutrients that they need. You want to be careful with the high fiber products too in the beginning, because if a child's gut or anybody's gut is ill and they're not just digesting properly, or with the old adage, oh, they've got constipation, and you think, let's put in a bunch of fiber. Fiber can be very hard to digest if the gut is not working well. So small quantities, very small in the beginning. You can grind up some broccoli in the blender or puree it and add it to their smoothie, or you can also use the super green food powder that I mentioned. It's loaded with these nutrients. But I just always want to say that to every parent. Make sure you know to start out with anything new very slowly, and then watch your child to make sure they are digesting properly, because it will take time for their gut to adjust, and for them to be weaned off of those opiates, and for them to be weaned off of the sugars, because their body's also addicted to the sugars. Now, the sugars are not only bad for them as far as inflammation and keeping the gut lining weak, but the sugars will also feed the bad bacteria in the gut, like candida. Candida thrives on sugar. So the reasoning for giving less sugar besides the inflammation, and reducing even the fruit down to a bare minimum, is so that we are starving the candida out. Now, again, fruit might be needed a little bit here and there. You just don't want to do it in excess, but it does flavor the smoothies. This collagen that I will link to, the collagen powder, that again is very, very high quality, all grass fed, and again gets the proteins and some of these amino acids and some of this nutrition that I'm talking about in, plus the glycine to help the gut lining. It is flavorless. They do make one in a chocolate and a vanilla flavor, but I have linked to the unflavored one because you can mix it into a hot beverage, a cold beverage. You can mix it into any food. You can mix it in with their smoothies, and they're very likely to not taste it if you have a very picky eater, or one that just seems to sense anything new that you try to hide in their food. We've all been there. So it's very important. Again, collagen has so many benefits, really helps our joints and our ligaments. I mean, it's good for mom and dad to eat too as well, good for the organs and the bones. And it's also good for a lot of those interstitial tissues, which are in the matrix, which is basically the stuff between our cells, which helps the cell growth and their health. So this is very, very, very important for all of our health. Of course, cartilage is found in things like our joints, but also our ears, our nose, and the muscles are really helped by it as well, and blood vessels. So there are a lot of big benefits to it, and I just want to make sure that you're aware of it, and that it can be really helpful with this transition to getting them into healthier foods, and even ongoing. Maybe it's something you want to continue on having in your diet or your child's diet on a regular basis, as well as the super green food powder that I'll be linking to, because they're both very, very high quality and the companies that make them are of the, have the utmost highest practices. Do my research well, and that I wouldn't link to anything that had any concerns at all. So again, you'll get a link. And the super green food powder, the company actually gives me a discount code to offer you, which will give you a discount off of your entire first order with their company. So I will link to that in the show notes for you as well. And that's basically what I wanted to cover today, because I want you to know, again, making homemade bone broth can be really helpful, but some of us, many of us, don't have a lot of time. And so time is of the essence. And in that case, we want to make sure that we are, uh, you know, finding things and sources that can be really high quality, but don't take a lot of our time. If you have time to make homemade bone broth, excellent. But again, make sure everything is absolutely organic. And of course, if you're eating any fish, it should be line caught and wild. All of these things, and grass-fed beef only. So these are really important practices always. It's important to know that these will supplement and give your child and you some really healthy ways to get some good nutrition in that's easy. And I'm hoping it helps you with that transition to the diet, because again, it's so important to make sure that your child is on the right diet. And I know the transition can be hard, so I'm hoping that this makes it a lot easier for you. And again, don't forget to get my free foods guide that will give you the top 7 foods to start eliminating. You could start there, and it's going to be a slow transition. So be nice to yourself, because you're going to be thinking, there's no way I can do this, but you can. These tips I gave you today, I think, are really helpful for this process. I know they're really helpful for the process, but also they can lessen your worry and concern about getting nutrition into your child. You're getting protein, amino acids, you're getting the nutrients, the minerals, and the vitamins from the fruits and vegetables, from the super green food powder. If you're vegetarian, you can choose the protein source from the hemp powder as well. But these are very important, again, for making sure that during the transition and ongoing, you're really getting some good, healthy nutritional sources into your child as they're growing, and as you're helping their gut lining heal before you move on to the other pieces. So again, the free 7 foods guide, where I also explain more of the reasoning why behind those foods, as well as giving the list to you, is at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/7 foods. Just the number 7 and the word foods with no spaces in between. And if this podcast has been helpful for you, if you go on iTunes and leave me a review, it really helps other parents to find it and see that it's been helpful for other parents as such as yourself, and leads them to looking into it and getting the resources that they need for themselves and their children. And I always appreciate that being done. So if you take a minute to do that, that is very helpful. So thank you again for being here and being a proactive parent and getting the resources you need to help your child and yourself, and for everything that you are doing for your family. And don't forget about yourself, about self-care. We're going to be starting to talk about more about you, mom and dad. So in future episodes, we're going to be discussing some things that can be a little bit more beneficial for you, or a lot more beneficial for you as the caretaker, because self-care is so important. So for now, have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next time.